So this past weekend, we just had the 2023 Augusta National Women's Amateur, and what a nail biter. That really delivered as an event. I learned a ton, a lot of which was great tidbits that we got from the announcers. And this video is about the 13 things that I learned from watching the Augusta National Women's Amateur. Hey, welcome. I'm Manu. So I usually really enjoy watching the Augusta National Women's Amateur. That's a mouthful. ANWA. The acronym's a mouthful too. I usually really enjoy watching that event because the competitors have such beautiful and technically perfect swings, which as an amateur I feel I can learn a lot from. You know, I can't just muscle my way through the shots like the tour pros on the PGA Tour can, and so technique is really all we got. And while the announcers are often there to create some tension, maybe some suspense and some drama,
this is almost a desperation feeling, you know, right now for him.
I also find that I usually learn a lot from them because they're offering such great insights. Now usually what I do is I go, that was a smart point. Then I forget all about it. But this time I took notes, and I thought I'd share those notes with you. The final round had some fantastic announcers this time, with Paige McKenzie, Morgan Pressel, Jim Bones Mackay, and Mike Tirico. And so here are the things I learned. Some of them are totally new to me, and some of them were super helpful reminders. I put them into 3 categories: planning for a round, playing the round, and then the mental game side.
She took yesterday to plan her game around the golf course today, which may adapt a little bit based on the conditions, but she took so many mental notes yesterday on where she wants to be on just about every hole.
So that was Morgan Pressel talking about Rose Zhang, the eventual winner, before tee-off. Sorry about the spoiler. But I think there's 2 really important parts to this. The first is it's really important to have a course plan. If you want to play well, you have to have a course plan. You have to know where to hit, where not to hit. And second is, even though you have a course plan, you have to be open to adapting it as conditions change. Maybe there's more wind than you expected, or maybe the pin position isn't exactly where you expected it to be. Or maybe some part of your swing just isn't working today and you have to adapt because usually you hit a fade, but now you're hitting draws. You can ask Colin Morikawa about that one.
That's a little bit like what Ann Walker mentioned she would tell Rose to do. Hit it to the fat part of the green and 2-putt your way to the clubhouse.
So Ann Walker is the coach of the Stanford women's golf team that Rose Zhang plays on. Now, what Paige McKenzie's talking about here is advice that Ann Walker gave Rose Zhang prior to starting the final round, where she started with a 5-shot lead. And that makes perfect sense. If you've got a 5-shot lead, your goal is to not make mistakes and just play fairly well. But this is also really good advice for the rest of us amateurs. Hitting the fat part of the green and 2-putting our way all the way through the course actually leads to really good scores. And every so often you'll get lucky and that 2-putt will turn to a 1-putt, which means you'll be able to make up for the 3 putts that you made. Or you're going to end up suddenly playing under par. Unless you really need to make birdie, this is probably the best answer. Just hit the fat part of the green and 2-putt your way all the way to the clubhouse.
Her coach George Pennell told me that. Said one time after a round of golf when she was really struggling, she went to the range and didn't hit a single ball. Just took practice swings and worked on her fundamentals.
I thought this was fascinating and shows a ton of self-control. I mean, I know how much self-control it takes for me to not hit a golf ball when it's right there. Heck, even when I'm watching YouTube videos and the person there is talking about all this stuff and there's a ball on the ground right there next to them or holding a club and I'm just like, hit the ball, you gotta hit the ball. And I'm watching this person. It's ridiculous. Now, obviously, this doesn't work for new swing changes because you have to get some swing feedback to see what's happening. But Rose knew what she was doing, and all she needed to do was get the feel into her system and get the fundamentals checked. The other really important thing here is that not all practice sessions have to last a long time. So just going out there and taking you for practice swings may only take you a few minutes. Even Tiger talks about this in his book, How I Play Golf, which, by the way, if you haven't read, is the best book on golf that personally I've ever read. I've read not that many, maybe like a dozen, but it's still a really fantastic book and I highly recommend it. I've got a link down below if you want to check it out. But in that, he talks about how a practice session doesn't need to be really long to be fruitful. And some of his most productive practice sessions have lasted all of 20 minutes. So just going out there and making some good practice swings with the right fundamentals probably end up being really good. And I'm going to start doing that with, when I'm in the kitchen.
And you would think these young ladies spend a lot of time on the putting green post-delay, just having a look at how the speed has changed with all the rain we got here the previous 2 or 3 hours.
Now this is an obvious one, but it's amazing how often some of us forget this. Now when it's wet, the place we're going to notice most of this moisture is on the green. And so it makes more sense to pay an extra little bit of attention when you're on the practice green before the round, or actually even the first few holes as you're getting on, in case the practice green isn't the same as what you see on the course. And also, if the whole round's going to be a little wet, or if there's been a lot of rain, it just makes sense as you walk onto every hole, just notice what the grass feels like under your feet and how much moisture the green might have retained, and then adjust your stroke accordingly.
Well, she knows the shot that she was preparing to hit, and undoubtedly as the players left off in their practice before returning, hit a few similar shots to this. This is her third shot.
Now, I think this idea of making your last shot on the range the same as your first shot on the course is a really important one. And if you watch Tiger's warm-ups, you'll notice he does this too. The last shot he hits is always usually the driver or the 3-wood, whatever he's about to hit on the first hole. And there's two big reasons for this. The first is you get the feel in your body ingrained for, whatever shot you're about to hit. So you know exactly what that feels like because you just hit it a couple of minutes ago. And the second big thing is it builds confidence in your mind, because when you're on the first tee, maybe people are watching you or you're thinking about getting your round off to a good start. At least you have this confidence in you that you just hit this exact shot you're about to hit a few minutes ago on the range. Personally, when I'm warming up before a tournament, my last shot on the range, I also practice what it feels like to walk up to that shot after the starter calls my name, because there's extra nervousness and stuff tied into that, right? So I think about that. Someone calls my name, I walk up, I say thank you, and then I get ready to hit my shot. Because at that point, those nerves that are happening, now that I've already done it on the range, it actually is much less nervy than before. Try it. I'm sure you'll find it useful. Okay, so that was the planning section. Let's move on to the stuff I learned about playing the round better.
If I'm caddying for Rose today, one of the things I'm thinking about is if we get out of position, let's not make any scores today worse than bogey.
Now, while this is especially relevant for Rose because she was taking a 5-shot lead into the final round of a huge tournament, I think it's just really good advice for the rest of us too. As much as possible, trying to stay away from scores that are worse than bogey is going to help our rounds. And I think that's what kills a lot of our rounds when we're trying to get down from like that 10 to maybe like, a 2 or 3 handicap. The double bogeys just make life really, really hard. And this is something Tiger talks about too, where he's okay making a bogey if he really has to. If you've got to do some damage control, making bogey, getting out of there, taking your medicine is okay, because he can get that back with a birdie on the next hole or next couple of holes. Once you make a double bogey, now you're playing into deficit land because you have to plan for several birdies in the next few holes to try to catch up. So early on in a round, if there's going to be damage, it's best to just take your medicine and keep that damage as low as possible, like Rose did here. She drove the ball into a fairway bunker on her opening hole, and she could have really risked a second shot to make it all the way to the green, but the bunker had a high lip, and so she blasted it out like a 60-yard shot and then played a third shot onto the green to try to keep damage to an absolute minimum versus going for a hero shot and risking making double, triple, maybe even worse.
And again, she had 3 wasted shots in chipping out due to poor drives.
So this one's pretty self-explanatory, but unfortunately it tends to hit pretty close to home for some of us who tend to hit the ball into the woods, the deep bunkers, the hazard, like you name it. And while there's ways, you turn into a positive, you got to be upbeat. I have a buddy, Kelly, who talks about how great his punching out from under the trees game is. They still are all wasted shots. And so maybe if we were a little bit smarter and just hit a slightly safer shot into the fairway and then hit the fat part of the green and made a 2-putt, we'd possibly have lower scores. Yeah, I know you're about to say that. What's the fun in that? You got to grip it and rip it. But seriously, lower scores.
The number one job here, Bones, is to get it out of the bunker. Can't leave it in and start to compound mistakes.
A huge false front on this green, and you've got to take care of that before you do everything else, so 120 minimum.
No, you didn't miss anything. That was meant to be 2 examples about focusing on the number one priority. And that's the thing. Sometimes we get so caught up in hitting to the perfect location for the next shot that we forget that the number one priority is really hitting to a safe location for the next shot. The last place you want to be after trying to hit the ball out of a bunker is back in that bunker.
And I think the one very important thing here is to make sure you leave yourself a third that you can take a swing at. Sometimes you see players leave the ball too close to the water, and it makes contact that much more nervy in terms of playing their third towards the flag.
I found this one especially helpful for me. I kind of knew about this, but it hadn't really sunk in until the way that Bone said it right here. It really kind of like landed in my mind. I'm going to remember this for the future. What it comes down to is we tend to think that short shots are better than longer shots, which makes sense, and the data shows that too. But I think it's important to differentiate between short shots and delicate shots. When we lay up too close to a hazard, when I lay up too close to a hazard, I'm now having to hit a delicate shot. You got to nip that ball perfectly. You got to put the right amount of spin on it. You got to make sure you don't miss, the hazard. You end up landing the ball in the hazard. That's just a rough spot to be in. But if you lay up 30, 40 yards behind that, now you're hitting a 50, 60 yard wedge, or maybe a 90 yard wedge, or whatever your favorite yardage is. And it just takes a lot of that weight off the mind because you're hitting a fuller shot. And it's not just about carrying this, short 5 yard, 10 yard hazard or bunker, whatever it might be.
One thing I'm paying attention to here, Bones, her shoulders look very square here, and a couple of those squirrely drives look like she was set a little bit open.
This is a beautiful play. Left center.
Good adjustment.
I needed to find that little trigger point in my swing. I had an aha moment in the back nine. I adjusted my grip to be a little bit weaker on my right hand, and it's history from there.
That was another one with 2 video examples. And before we get into what I learned out of this, can we pause for a second and just recognize Rose Zhang's genius of being able to figure out these tiny changes in the middle of a really important round when things weren't going well? Friggin' magic. Anyway, the 2 things I got out of this were, number 1, our adjustments on the course don't need to be huge, right? As amateurs, we tend to believe that. We tend to be like, oh man, I'm not getting my hand moving in the right way through this. I got to shelve the club and bring it through. And you're on the 4th hole. The amount of mental overhead that creates is just not useful. And so, number 1, I got out of this that adjustments need to be small so that they can be made without a whole bunch of mental overhead. And the second thing, you'll notice both of these adjustments were setup adjustments, right? So one was a stance and one was a grip. And so as much as these adjustments can be non-mental overhead types, so ideally in grip, stance, ball, position, or alignment, I think that's most useful. And that's something I'll be using as I go forward when I've got a rough time on the course. And that's something Butch Harmon talked about too as well, if you read some of his books. The key points he talks about are when things are going wrong, always go back to the original 4, right? Grip, stance, alignment, ball position. And so made perfect sense. Seemed to work for Rose Zhang. Okay, and now on to the mental game section.
Yeah, there's a level of control, and that is an incredible feeling when you play this game, to know exactly where the ball is going to go. It's what every player practices for. It's what we all desire to do, but more importantly, you just hope you do it when the moments matter.
So I find that last line from Paige McKenzie, you just hope you do it when the moments matter, to be absolutely fascinating. I mean, these players practice all the time. They have access to the best coaches, they have access to often free equipment and free range time, and yet even they can't pull out their best game every time they need it. I mean, fair enough, first of all, but second of all, for us regular amateurs, mere mortals, what does that mean? Maybe it means that if we're only playing once a week on Sunday, we're probably not going to have our best game, and that's okay. Like, some of the time we are going to have our best game, and other times, not so much. And so maybe what it means is that we could be a little bit nicer to ourselves and change our expectations a little bit. Or maybe even we could just call it being a little bit more upbeat.
That's a terrific shot from there.
I mean, honestly, just to leave this on the top, on the putting green area. It's not on the green, but it didn't roll all the way back down that slope. It was very well done.
So I thought this was a huge point because, let's be honest, for most of us, if we were hitting a bunker shot like this and it didn't stop on the green, we'd probably be pretty unhappy about it. Yes, I know we're not all playing Augusta, but you get what I mean, right? And that's the thing. Sometimes it's important to just be objective about the shot we just hit, and ideally a little optimistic, and recognize that maybe it wasn't our fault. Maybe it was just luck, or it was physics. And I think there's also another bonus to that, which is it doesn't mess with our biochemistry. Because when we get pissed, now you're starting to get adrenaline, some cortisol, the hormones are getting released in your bloodstream, and now you're going to go into a downward spiral a lot faster, and it's going to be harder to get out. So being optimistic about it and just nicer to ourselves, I think also keeps us in a happier state and more likely to continue playing better. That was an awesome shot.
What would you advise for a player like this going through a turmoil to try to hang on?
I think she just needs to breathe. She needs to take a lot of very deep breaths. Things get quick when you're under pressure. Your breath gets quick, your swing gets quick, your decision making gets quick.
This one seems simple, but it's probably the most important tip here. So our breath has a direct connection to the fear center in our brains. And so when we stop breathing, we start stressing. Think about what happens whenever you see someone scared, right? They go and hold their breath. Or when they relax, they go and they let it out. Right? So breathing is super important, and you probably heard about this if you watched Phil Mickelson play the 2021 PGA Championship at Kiowa, which he won. But he talked about how he focused on his breathing the entire tournament. So all 4 rounds, what he was doing was focusing on his breathing. And there's a bunch of videos of him just like standing on the tee, just like stoic. Who knows what he was thinking about, but he tells us he was thinking about his breathing. So yeah, when in doubt or when things start to get a little quick, maybe just take a few belly breaths and think about something hilarious. That always helps too, right? A little laughing gets that breath going. Now take a deep breath and smile. You just learned or got reminded of a bunch of dope tips for your next round. And do you remember tip number 1, make a course plan? Well, check out this video here for how to do exactly that. Anyway, thanks for watching. Keep hanging out, being cool, and see you next time. Ciao. Not like a reasonable... God damn it. Stop doing that. Why did you fall? There's no reason to fall. Man,